Tired.
Oh, thanks. I needed that.
Huge. Hola.
This town is so very nice, and everything's just so very, very nice. See, somebody's out there.
What's your connection with this fella?
I was his lawyer. But you shackled him somehow, right?
What was he in prison for?
No, really. What did you do? Have you been following? It's a small town. Every way you turn, I guess we're gonna run into each other.
Dad, you should have just punched him out.
Yeah, you know how to fight, Beardy. You do that for a living.
This guy, he threatened you? He's clever, so that the law can't touch him.
We got this freaking psychopath in our faces. I mean, who knows what's true and what isn't?
I'm just losing my mind here.
You thought about me last night, didn't you? Evening, ladies.
Hello?
I think we're alone now.
Where are you from?
I'm from the Black Forest. Maybe I'm a big bad wolf. Do you mind if I put my arm around you?
How's it going, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Underrated Series. I'm your host, Steve Cravens, and today I'm going to be talking about Martin Scorsese's Cape Fear, which was released on November 15th, 1991. It stars Robert De Niro, Nick Nolte, Jessica Lange, and Juliette Lewis, and it is a remake of a movie by the same name that was released in 1962, starring Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum, who actually have extended cameos in this version. Usually, you don't hear the name Martin Scorsese and underrated in the same sentence. I think it's pretty much universally regarded that Martin Scorsese is the greatest American filmmaker to ever step behind a camera. I mean, it's debatable. You can put a bunch of names in there, but it's pretty much universally regarded that he is at least a top 3 American filmmaker of all time. And indeed, one of the greatest filmmakers in cinema history all around the world. So his movies are studied, appreciated, loved. I mean, he is a master. Still and so, there are a couple of movies in his filmography that I feel don't get the attention they deserve because they're dwarfed by some of his more, shall we say, elite films. And by those elite films, I'm talking Taxi Driver, I'm talking Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Casino, The Departed, The Wolf of Wall Street, etc. and so forth. And then there's a second rung of Scorsese film that is like the excellent category. They're not quite elite, but they're still incredible in their own right. And you're talking, Mean Streets, you're talking The Last Temptation of Christ, The Age of Innocence, Gangs of New York, The Aviator, Shutter Island, Hugo, Silence. Cape Fear belongs in that rung as far as I'm concerned. It's not an elite Scorsese movie, but it is still damn good, especially for a more, high concept Scorsese movie. This is a very mainstream Scorsese movie. It's not, one of his personal works that you could tell he was just a total labor of love. And yet, it's got all of the hallmarks of a great Scorsese film. Even though this is a remake and it's a very Hollywood remake, it's unmistakably a Scorsese film, whether it's the quality of the performances he gets from the actors across the board. Robert De Niro and Juliette Lewis actually got Oscar nominations for their work, or the incredibly rich and active camera work, Thelma Schoonmaker's breathless editing, the score, which was composed by Elmer Bernstein, but it is essentially, it's Bernard Herrmann's score from the original film. It's just, updated by Elmer Bernstein for this version. You can sense that even though this isn't a labor of love, it is indeed it's kind of like Scorsese having fun with the material. This is a genre that he doesn't really dabble in too much, the thriller. Even bits of horror sprinkled in there. So let me give you a little backstory about the making of the movie and how Scorsese came to direct it, because originally Steven Spielberg was set to direct this in the late 80s with Bill Murray to play Max Cady. What happened was Spielberg was given the book Schindler's List by Sid Sheinberg, who was one of the heads of the studio at Universal. Spielberg did not want to direct it himself. He felt that a more accomplished filmmaker should direct it. This was in the early 80s. This was like 1983. He offered the book, the project to Roman Polanski, Billy Wilder, who was retired by that point, and Martin Scorsese. Billy Wilder turned it down. Roman Polanski turned it down because at that point he was not ready to tackle the subject of the Holocaust because his mother and grandmother were killed in Auschwitz. But Scorsese accepted. He accepted. That was going to be it. Spielberg was going to produce it. Scorsese was going to direct it. And we were going to get that version of Schindler's List. And then eventually down the line, Spielberg was going to eventually get to Cape Fear under his Amblin banner, his production company. What happened was Scorsese realized that the subject matter would be more appropriate for a Jewish filmmaker to make. He told Spielberg, he said, listen, this is something that you should direct. You're perfect for this. This would be kind of like, the project for you to really kind of, get out of those constraints of being, kind of like the blockbuster guy, the guy who, makes Jaws and E.T. and Indiana Jones and all these movies. This is an opportunity for you to flex your artistic side and prove that you are a true visionary, an artist, and not just a product of this, the studio system. Spielberg kind of thought about it and he said, okay, all right. And he decided to take on the project himself. And then he said, well, what about you directing Cape Fear? And Scorsese turned him down. He said, no, that is a high concept movie. That's not really my wheelhouse. I'm not going to, no, thank you. So Scorsese weighed this and he said, okay, you know what? Let me read the script. And he read the script and then he said, no, I cannot do this movie. I can't even get past the family in the first 10 pages. They're too happy. They're too neat. No family in America is this, this content with each other, where it's, very much like Leave It to Beaver. And he said, I might consider this material if I can, kind of rewrite the screenplay and kind of really mess up the family. Maybe the husband's having an affair, maybe the wife is depressed, maybe the daughter's on drugs, or, there's got to be some way we can make this more grounded and more real and kind of make the family miserable because that's more believable. Every family has its own issues, regardless of what they may be, and it's not usually limited to one issue. So at the end of the day, Scorsese got his wish and he got to kind of mess up the family and kind of make them more in his image and what he thought the American family should be. Very dysfunctional, everything seems normal on the surface. Everybody seems happy on the surface, but right beneath the surface, there's a lot of turmoil and angst and resentment between everybody, between the wife, played by Jessica Lange, the husband, played by Nick Nolte, and the daughter, played by Juliette Lewis. As a result, we got the Cape Fear that we have now, and we got the Schindler's List that we have now. Would I have loved to have seen Spielberg's version of Cape Fear? Yeah, I would have, especially with Bill Murray as Max Cady, which was the original plan. Absolutely. Would I have loved to have seen Martin Scorsese's Schindler's List? Yeah, I would have. But as it turned out, it worked out for both parties. We have a masterpiece with Schindler's List, and we have a damn good Scorsese film on the other hand. So going forward, I'm going to go into some spoilers, and if you haven't seen the movie yet, by all means log off now if you don't want to be spoiled, because spoilers from here on out. So the film opens up with the character of Max Cady, played by Robert De Niro, just getting out of prison. He has been doing his time for raping and beating the crap out of a young woman. And he gets out 14 years later, and he moves to New Essex, which is the home of Samuel Bowden, again played by Nick Nolte, and his wife and daughter. Samuel Bowden used to live in Atlanta with his wife, and he was Cady's defense lawyer during the trial. Bowden had found out that the woman that Cady had raped and brutally beat was promiscuous, and that the crime was actually a crime of passion. Knowing this, he realized that if he were to submit this evidence to the judge, and the jury saw it, they would give Cady a lighter sentence, and they would not put him away for over a decade. As it is, Bowden decided to go with his morals, and he decided to bury that evidence. Evidence that would have given Cady a much lighter sentence. And Cady, somehow, some way, found out about this. And as soon as he got out, he decided to go straight to New Essex and wreak havoc on the Bowden family. While in prison, Cady had, learned to read. He was apparently illiterate at his trial, and he studied law. So he started to learn what was barely legal, what could you get away with without evidence, how to work the judicial system. And he basically became Bowden's worst nightmare, because, a lawyer thinking he would have the upper hand on everything, legality related. Cady he's now the Terminator just with a law degree. And that is just, it's terrifying to think about. And why I bring up this movie, why I want to talk about this movie being underrated, is because on the surface, it's, it is a remake of, frankly, a better movie. I do think the original film is better. It is a much more restrained movie, and it's still a little sleazy. As a matter of fact, I remember seeing it on the TV for the first time when I was 12 years old. I was staying with my grandfather when he was visiting over in a condo on the beach, and it came on Turner Classic Movies. And he caught me watching, and it was towards the end when they were on the houseboat, and he said, "Turn this off, this is crap. This movie is sleazy. It's not, you don't need to be watching this." Watching it all the way through years later, it is a little sleazy, but not as sleazy as Scorsese's Remake. It's certainly not as abrasive or as violent as Scorsese's Remake. But nonetheless, I still prefer it to Scorsese's film, despite Scorsese's film being a very good movie. But it is not just your average run-of-the-mill thriller. You usually don't get acting of this caliber with most other thrillers. Certainly thrillers in the hands of lesser filmmakers other than Scorsese. When you think about Scorsese, you think about very, intense camera work, beautiful lighting, masterful editing by his lifetime editor, Thelma Schoonmaker. But it's the performances that really set this film apart. Specifically, Robert De Niro's portrayal of Max Cady. For those of you who don't know, Robert De Niro is a student of Stella Adler. And one of the hallmarks of Stella Adler's acting studio was to take your character and imagine yourself as that character in animal form. Whether it's a good guy, bad guy, a victim, the aggressor, whoever it is. Just picture yourself as an animal. Who does that character, when you think of that character, what do they come to mind as? For example, Jim Carrey, when he was doing Ace Ventura, the animal that he pictured himself as Ace Ventura, was a pigeon. And that's why he modeled himself with the bopping head and the walking. So that kind of fed its way into that performance. For Max Cady, Robert De Niro modeled his performance and his interpretation of Max Cady off of Cobra. And you can even see that with his hair. He has his hair kind of, done up like a cobra's hood. And in his southern accent, which, by the way, Scorsese found so creepy and so terrifying that De Niro, as a prank, started to call up his hotel room in the middle of the night during filming and leaving creepy voicemails on his voice recorder just to screw with him. It really kind of feeds into that image of like, oh my God, yeah, he kind of does look like if not a cobra, at least a snake, like coiled up in a circle, just staring at you, waiting to strike. And his southern drawl is so creepy and it's so trashy, and it makes you loathe him all the more. Unlike other characters that De Niro plays in Scorsese movies, you do not have any pity for Max Cady. You can understand his rage. Understand why he hates Samuel Bowden and why he wants to really hurt them where it hurts. Ultimately physically, but first mentally and emotionally, he really wants to break that family down and just bring them down to his level and make them pay for the 14 years of hell that he has had to endure. Other Scorsese De Niro collaborations, whether it's Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, whether it's Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull, whether it's Rupert Pupkin in The King of Comedy, you don't have, for the most part, all and out hate for these characters. You pity them more than anything. Travis Bickle is a product of society and a product of his PTSD and, isolation, his societal isolation and his loneliness. So he's not a good guy. He's anything but. As a matter of fact, he is a piece of shit. But you do pity this man. He didn't have to turn out this way. Raging Bull, Jake LaMotta, again, a piece of shit. But again, you pity this guy because he is his own worst enemy. And at the end of the day, he does end up being alone. And, it's almost kind of sad to see, despite him deserving the fate that he gets. Max Cady is totally different. You don't pity this guy. You not only hate this guy, you're scared of this guy. This guy could be anybody walking down the street. he could be your neighbor. He could be the guy behind you shopping for groceries. And he's almost kind of like a ghost. He kind of like, appears and disappears at will. He's like a specter in that way. He's like death. 1 minute he's there, 1 minute he's not. And De Niro is so brilliant in this role. He gets over the top towards the end, but his performance is what really sets this movie apart and what makes this movie, let's say, more memorable than most thrillers that have come out in the last 30 years or so. Just an absolutely brilliant performance. Again, he was up for the Best Actor nomination, but he lost to Anthony Hopkins that year for The Silence of the Lambs. And then you get to Nick Nolte, who is, he's always been a fantastic actor. There's no question about that. But this is different because, again, usually with Nick Nolte, he's the tough guy. He's the aggressor. And in this case, he is, he may be a victim of Cady's brutality and terror, but he deserves it. He deserves it because at the end of the day, his job was to defend Cady to the best of his ability, and he didn't do that. And as a result of him bearing the evidence in the trial, his wife and daughter have to suffer through it. And Jessica Lange, obviously, a tour de force actress in her own right, her and Nick Nolte have a moment in the movie where they start arguing because Jessica Lange thinks that Nick Nolte's having an affair with a young clerk from the courthouse. And it is so real. It's such a believable, real argument between these two actors. And the tension is so unbearable. The screaming is so unbearable. And again, it hits home because all of us, to one degree or another, have either seen our parents argue like this, or friends argue like this, or any number of loved ones argue like this. And it doesn't even feel like acting. Again, Scorsese gets such powerhouse performances from his actors. And this movie is no different. Again, not one of his more elite films, not one of his personal films, but still his knack for getting just the most raw and emotional performances from his actors. It's as present here as it is ever in any of his works of art. Then you get to Juliette Lewis. Juliette Lewis, this was kind of her breakout role, really kind of put her on the map. And she has a look about her that is just as off-putting and just as unnerving as anything Max Cady does. Specifically in the sequence in the theater scene in the high school when Danielle goes to summer school. And the scene is basically a seduction scene with Cady and with Danielle. And fun fact for those of you who don't know, most of that scene was completely improvised. There was no dialogue written for that scene. It was originally written as a chase sequence to kind of mirror the same scene in the original, but Scorsese felt that this scene should really be a view into how a person as vile and repulsive as Cady could lure a young woman to trust him and to fall for him. We saw it earlier in the movie when he lured Ileana Douglas's character to get drunk with him, where he ultimately rapes and bites her cheek off and beats the crap out of her. And in the scene where, he asks her, may I kiss you? That scene was completely improvised. Juliette Lewis didn't know that De Niro was going to do that. And the whole thing with the thumb going into her mouth where she's sucking and licking his thumb and he's pulling it in and out of her mouth, De Niro improvised that. She had no idea he was going to do that. So that makes it even creepier and even more kind of like, ugh, it's just like, ugh, so off-putting. And it's a scene like that that shows you just how great Juliette Lewis is. The young actress, first big movie, and she holds her own with De Niro in that scene. She's just as much a force of nature as De Niro is in this movie. And she conveys so many different emotions effortlessly. And it's really, she's been wonderful in other movies she's done. She's great as Mallory Knox in Natural Born Killers. But man, for me, this is like, whenever I think of Juliette Lewis, I can't get this character or this performance out of my mind. It really is brilliant. So there you have the four main actors and actresses in the movie. Powerhouses all. And again, I didn't really talk that much about Jessica Lange, but man, she is unbelievable in this film. Specifically towards the climax when they're on the houseboat in the tropical storm, which I'll get to later. Another aspect of this movie that I think makes it very, very underrated is just how stylish it is. Scorsese's always been a stylish filmmaker, but the thing that makes him very unique is that where most directors kind of struggle to be stylish with the camera and be effective with their actors, Scorsese does it, like with an ease that has never been seen before or after. And like I said, even though this movie is a blockbuster, even though it's very impersonal, you get the sense that there is a very, very talented, efficient filmmaker behind the camera. Even if you didn't know Martin Scorsese directed this thing, you would still get the vibe that he did because it feels like a Scorsese film. So as it's been said in the past, any great movie needs to have at least 5 great scenes and no bad ones. And this scene has brilliant scenes across the board, really memorable scenes. From the scene in the movie theater where the family goes to the movies and Robert De Niro comes in and he starts smoking the cigar and he starts laughing like a maniac and the cigar smoke is billowing back into the audience. And Nick Nolte's like, oh my God, this is unbearable. And he grabs him on the excuse me, can you stop? And De Niro just kind of like, brushes him off and puts his, hands back in his hair, just starts laughing even louder and smoking the cigar even louder. And it's like becomes very terrifying. For those of you who have not seen The Simpsons spoof of this scene, please do, because you'll never look at that scene in the same way again. And then you have one of the most unforgettable and disturbing scenes in recent movie history, if you want to call 30 years recent. You've got the scene where Laurie, played by Illeana Douglas, who was the young woman who has been flirting and seeing Sam Bowden outside of work, where she meets Max Cady at the bar. And Max Cady's been kind of stalking her because he's been following Bowden around. And again, another scene that was completely improvised between Illeana Douglas and Robert De Niro. And, they're flirting back and forth and, Cady's kind of being, very suave and very charismatic and, again, kind of pulling the whole, Ted Bundy act, where he's, being very sweet and funny and, getting them to trust him, getting them to drink more. And ultimately, she ends up going home with him. And we see, De Niro from the top down with all the tats he's got. And it's a very, very tough scene to watch because we know it's coming. And he handcuffs Illeana Douglas behind her back and he breaks her arm. And then he goes down right into her cheek and he bites her a chunk of flesh off her cheek. And then proceeds to beat the ever-living crap out of her with Elmer Bernstein's score, at fever pitch in the background. De Niro actually did extensive research on rape cases and rape victims, and that's where he got the idea to bite Illeana Douglas's cheek off, is because he saw, pictures of victims in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, which was where the film was shot. Fort Lauderdale, born and raised, by the way. And he told Scorsese, I want to have a scene where I bite a piece of her cheek off because, I've seen these pictures of these poor rape victims that have just been absolutely annihilated by these monsters. And I think it would make the scene all the more shocking and make the audience hate Max all the more. So that's why that scene is in there. Again, incredibly brutal to watch, shocking to this day, and yet it's one of the more powerful moments in the movie because it is very real and it is very much, something that you hear about in the news frequently. Again, it's not easy to watch, but it's certainly memorable, and it's the best way I can say it is it's well made. It's a well-made sequence. And then you have other memorable exchanges. You have the exchange between Cady and Cusick, played by the great Joe Don Baker, outside of a breakfast restaurant in the marina in Fort Lauderdale, where they have that intense exchange where Joe Don Baker threatens Max Cady to leave, and Max Cady's not having any of it. He's like, "Are you my friend? Oh, I thought you might have been my friend because I planned my comings and goings with friends. But if you're not my friend and you're planning my comings and goings, I call that presumptuous. As a matter of fact, I'd call that downright rude." And it's so great because Joe Don Baker's just like, he's just as ruthless as he is, and he starts talking mad shit to Cady. And it's a wonderful scene between the two of them, very intense. And then you have the sequence in the houseboat, the big finale. This is where the film kind of really goes off the rails, because beforehand, even though the movie was stylish, it went for a level of realism, believability. And by the time we get to the houseboat, when the Bowden family's forced to flee their house because Cady's just, Cady's getting closer and closer to killing them all, there's a tropical storm going on. And, they filmed the scene with miniatures and they filmed it on a tank. and it took a long time to film. But man, I mean, De Niro just hams it up and goes absolutely crazy when he starts taunting Danielle and Lee, played by Jessica Lange, and the camera work by Freddie Francis, who's the cinematographer for this film. I mean, Jesus, it is absolutely relentless, and it becomes borderline comical. Doesn't quite become comical, but it's borderline. And I think that ending is a reason why a lot of people don't hold this movie in higher regard. It's because it is almost kind of a betrayal of what came before it. It is kind of a shame when a movie strives for that realism, strives for that believability, and then it almost kind of embraces its B-movie roots to a fault. And you stop taking it seriously. And the violence stops becoming, it starts becoming cartoonish, and it's not as hard-hitting as it was, and therefore the movie as a whole is less effective. From that perspective, I can see why more people don't appreciate this movie or hold it to a higher standard that some of us do. It is a cult film, and truth be told, I can't fault them too much because it's a very rocky ending. Even when Max Cady is finally floating out onto the lake, he's got a piece of chain and a rock attached to his leg, I believe, is something that's dragging him out towards the lake, and he starts speaking in tongues because he believes he's going to finally go up to heaven to see God, because when he was in prison he turned into a Jesus freak. I mean, you can't help but giggle. It's kind of funny. I mean, it's ridiculous. The whole thing is over the top. And then you have the not so subtle, symbolism of, the blood on Bowden's hands, and then he puts the blood in the surf, and then the blood gets washed away in the water. It's like, okay, don't make it too obvious, Marty. But all that being said, I don't think the ham-handed handling of the ending, even though, and again, it's fun to watch and it's exciting, but damn, does it, it turns into Looney Tunes there for a while. I don't think that's enough to discount the movie that came before it. Again, can't say enough about the actors. Can't say enough about Scorsese's directing. Wesley Strick's screenplay is top-notch. And again, more thrilling, more memorable, more hard-hitting than most psychological thrillers out there. And it's got just enough sprinkling of horror elements in there to make it, more scary and disturbing than it otherwise would be. So, again, is it a perfect film? No, it's not. Does it deserve the flack that I've seen it get in recent years? Hell no. This is a great movie, and I recommend it for all of you who have stuck with me through this review to please give it a shot. It's on Netflix right now as I speak. And enjoy it, get some popcorn, and, just appreciate a thriller that doesn't come along very often, and certainly not from America's greatest filmmaker. And with one of the world's greatest actors. It's a great, great movie. Sloppy ending notwithstanding. So I'm going to leave you with my favorite scene from the movie. This is the scene where Max Cady pulls up to a bar, and Sam Bowden is hiding out watching him. And he has hired a couple of guys through P.I. Kursick to do a little hospital job on Cady. That's Kursick's terminology. And it ends up going not quite as he envisioned. And it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. So this has been the Underrated Series. This is Martin Scorsese's Cape Fear. I'm Steve Cravens. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.
Counselor? Counselor! Is that you? Counselor! Come out wherever you are.
I ain't no white trash piece of shit. I'm better than you all. I can outlearn you. I can outread you. I can outthink you. And I can out-philosophize you. And I'm gonna outlast you. You think a couple of whacks to my good old Borgert's gonna get me down? It's gonna take a hell of a lot more than that, counselor, to prove you're better than me. I am like God, and God like me. I am as large as God. He is as small as I. He cannot above me, nor I beneath him. Me! Silesia, 17th century. Counselor? Counselor? Could you be there? Could you be there? Counselor? I wonder if you're here.
Fuck it. You're here, what's the fuck's the difference? Fuck it.